Good morning, guys. Could you, for the sake of the camera, could you tell us your names? Whoever wants to start.
Gene Bennett.
Gene Bennett and?
Al Oliver.
All right. Gene, when were you born? What year?
1928.
1928. And Al?
1946.
Just a kid.
Yeah.
Just a pup.
And where are you two from originally? From Portsmouth?
I've been from this area. I lived in Wheelersburg really all my life basically, but I was born in Portsmouth at the old General Hospital at that time.
That's ironic because I was born October 14th, 1946 at Portsmouth General Hospital as well.
Oh, okay. And could you guys take just a second to tell me any experience that you remember from the time when you were young, when you were kids? One of your favorite things to look back on?
Well, I used to always say, in my time when I was growing up, I grew up in a time where kids got out in the street or out in the backyard and we were playing some kind of sport, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, or going out to the park, whether it be ping pong, horseshoes, or whatever. That's just where it was in the time in which I was raised. And I think that had a lot to do with a lot of us being good and great athletes. We took those skills and used them in all type of sports. And that was a common thing back then. And of course, being an 11, 12-year-old, of course, playing Little League Baseball here in Portsmouth, then the Cincinnati Reds, they were my favorite team. I grew up as a Reds fan. And of course, later on, I played against them. I wasn't a fan of theirs then, but now I'm back home. So it's funny how what goes around comes around. Now I'm back home, and now I'm a Reds fan now. Although I'm a Pirate, at heart, but I definitely follow the Reds and definitely wish them well. But Portsmouth in my time was a great place to be raised in. We had everything that we needed, and great home life, spiritual upbringing, and that had a lot to do with our success.
Is there anything that you would like to tell us about when you were a kid?
Well, I was, like I say, I was born in the General Hospital, like everybody else around here. And I really don't remember living, you might say, in Portsmouth, because shortly after that, my mom and dad moved to Wheelersburg. And actually, I tell people that if you go up Fairview Avenue, we live the last house on the right. And my mom and dad had like 5 acres there. So I've lived there basically all my life. Now, if you made a right, that was Van Dyke Avenue. And my great-grandmother lived out there, and she had 5 acres. So then, basically I grew up right in that area. And then, as I got bigger and so forth, got married, and we live in the place where my great-grandmother was. But the thing that I can remember as a little guy would be to listen to, we had no TV, had no radio, had nothing. Didn't have no organized little sports like the little leagues and so forth. And we was up maybe old enough to have some buddies that might went to church with you that maybe lived 3 miles away or 4 miles. So he'd get him 9 guys to play. And we get us 9 guys to play. Over here 9 guys to play, all right in Wheelersburg. And each Sunday we tried to play somebody, Saturday or Sunday. The only problem was we didn't have no baseballs. And a lot of times we had to take something and roll it up like as a baseball. And a lot of times we had one bat, and both teams would use the same bat, And bases, well, I can't tell you really what the bases were because we played out in cow pastures a lot of times. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the way that went, and really there was no other sports where a small child, a person could play. And that's kind of the way it got going. And then, I could remember listening to Wait on the Reds.
Me too.
Always would listen to the radio out on the tree at night when Joe Louis would fight. And the prize fighter would always never miss that. Everybody probably only had 1 or 2 radios on the whole street. So, you'd listen to that. And that's kind of the way it went. And it was, you was on bed by dark. It wasn't what you do. Well, what you did, you got up, you raised the garden and you worked and you helped these. We didn't have anything to eat because, those were tough days back through there. Mm-hmm. And then a little later on, as I got a little bit older, then Portsmouth started having a team in the Mid-Atlantic League, I believe it was. And they had a not-home thing down there because nobody had no money to pay a quarter to go down and see a baseball game. So if you could crawl through that knothole, you got in free. So we never missed when they had knothole night. Our parents would load the car up with kids on the street, and we'd go down and crawl through the hole. We'd get to see them play. That's kind of the way it was.
Oh, wow.
And, just like Gene is saying, what was very interesting, it just goes to prove, they did more with less. And today they got everything. And what's amazing, when Gene played, and Gene was a super player. Matter of fact, he was a super athlete in his day. And for some reason, I might be a little partial, but in Gene's time and in my time, this area probably had the greatest athletes that you'd ever want to see. Players today cannot match up with the players back in the 50s and 60s. And they have more. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what that says.
Right.
I really don't.
Right. I know you guys have some really impressive career credentials. Would you mind, just for the sake of having it on tape and so a viewer would know, give me sort of a summary of each of your careers and how each of those went?
I'll go first because Gene is a lot longer than mine.
Oh, no.
But I was very fortunate. I came out of Portsmouth High School in 1964, and I signed with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so actually I played 22 years of professional baseball, and 18 years of those were in the major leagues. And so, I was very fortunate to have played 18 years, and in those 18 years, I was fortunate enough to accumulate 2,743 hits. I was on a 1971 World Championship Pittsburgh Pirate team. In 1982 with the Montreal Expos, I was fortunate enough to go on and win a batting title. And when I left the game, as far as my career stats, I ranked probably in the top 20. I think I was 19th, possibly in doubles. I believe that I was 29th when I retired in the most base hits. And so my career, I was pleased with. I was very fortunate to have played with some good and great players. To have a lifetime batting average of 303 during the period of time in which I played, I feel good about that because in that era there were some great pitchers. Each and every time I went out there, I had to be right in order to hit them. There were no cream puffs, back there in the 60s and 70s. But I was very fortunate to have played at the time in which I did play, and to have played with Hall of Famers. I played in the middle of the late great Willie Stargell and the late great Roberto Clemente, and of course Bill Mazeroski was playing second base, who's now in the Hall of Fame when I first came up. So I tell people that I made those guys great, and that's the reason why they're in the Hall of Fame. But the fact of the matter is, all the teams I played on, I was very fortunate in my time to play with and against some of the greatest players that ever played the game. Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Carl Yastrzemski, Al Kaline. I mean, you name them. I played in a great era, and you don't appreciate those things while you're playing. But when you get out of the game and look back, I feel good about it.
Would you be willing to give us sort of a rundown of yours too?
Yeah, follow up with Al. Al was a great player. And I know Major League Baseball has had a lot of great players. This guy right here is one of them. This guy here deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He's got better numbers than a lot of people that's in the Hall of Fame. But I remember back, I played like for 6-7 years, all in the Reds farm system. And then I scouted for a long time. Then I was a scouting supervisor for a long time. And then since 1991, I've been the senior assistant to the general manager. And I remember when Al got to the big leagues, I'd go to ballparks, and of course then wasn't all that much to do. And the parks were full. And there was only 16 teams. It wasn't 30 like it is now. And I got sent. Now, how am I going to get to talk to Al Oliver? So I got to thinking. Back home, we call him Albert a lot.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I'd come in the stadium and be a crowd around there, And I never liked to go down to even the players that I signed. And they're there to play baseball, not to talk to me. But I did want them to know, like Larry, I was arrested, to know that I was in the park and I wanted to say hi. So I'd catch the time just right, and I'd put my hand like this and I'd say, "Hey, Albert."
Oh, yeah.
Real
Absolutely.
quick. I'd see, kind of hit spot me, give me a big shine. So that's one thing I always remember about when Al was playing. But
when I heard Albert, I knew it was somebody from home.
Local yokel.
Local yokel, yeah. but I had a great career. In fact, as a player, I separated shoulder real early, and when you had to be healthy to play. And I stumbled through there for 5 or 6 years, and I saw I wasn't going to advance too far because I couldn't throw. If you couldn't throw, you couldn't play much.
That's right.
A 16 team. So the scouting thing came up, and I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And that was the case too, where they had told me. I told them the last year that I played. I said, "This is the last year I'm going to play, regardless of what happens. I'm not going to play no more." So when the season was over, Bill McKechnie was the guy that was the baseball guy, the scout, farm director. He was everything, And so he told me, he said, man, back then scouts, if an organization, say like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, if you had 6 or 7 scouts, you had a lot of scouts, And he said, we might be going to put on another scout come next year. Or we're going to have a Class D team, and I believe it was Geneva, New York. And he said, "Would you be interested in either one of those things?" And I said, "I'm not all that sure about that." So anyway, I'd come home when the season was over, and just by luck I was downtown. I ran into Mr. Rickey, who was very seldom here. I mean, he wasn't here all that much. And, of course, he didn't know me from Adam, but everyone in the world knew who Mr. Rickey was. And so I went up and I told him who it was. And, of course, he was willing and ready to talk to every young guy that talked baseball. And you were talking to the best. And I told him the situation. I said, I'm not going to play no more. And I told the Reds, and they mentioned to me that they might have a couple of things going. One would be possibly a manager for a Class D team in Geneva, New York. And the other one would be possibility they're going to put on a scout. And I said, if you had that choice, which would you take? And that quick, he said, "I'd take the scouting job, because if you take the scouting job and you do a good job, you might have a job the rest of your life." And he said, you take that managing job, and you ain't got good players, you won't be back next year.
That's right.
So I called the Reds. I called the Reds the very next day, and I told McKechnie, I said, hey, if you do that, I'll take that scouting job. So that's where it kind of got started. And I was lucky through my whole career as a scout. I tried to pattern my style of scouting, which now, like with Mr. Ricky's style, is kind of gone now. But I tried to pattern my style after Mr. Ricky. Get as many bird dog guys as you could find. That was people that maybe lived in Ashton, Kentucky or Columbus, Ohio that could tip you off about players. Run as many tryout camps as you could find. Look for guys that could really run and throw. All those good things that you like. This guy could do them all 5. He was a 5-2 player. And so I tried to do that, and I went out and I got me, I kept 40 bird dog guys over my area, which was Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, and Michigan, and Ontario, Canada. And I kept 40 guys in that area. And it wasn't long until I started signing players. And it wasn't long until those players started going to the big leagues, because I was looking for those guys that could run and throw. And if they hit, you got a star. If they don't hit, you got a utility player. So that was kind of what I tried to do, everything that I could remember that he tried to do. And I was lucky to sign a lot of great players, a lot of guys, some of the best. Well, in the Reds' history down the line, like Don Clark from across the river, 19-year-old kid in the big leagues, Barry Larkin, Chris Sable, Paul Neal, Jeff Russell, Charlie Lee Brandt, Dave Tomlin, Skeeter Paul, and the list just went on. And it was because of all those players that really worked hard, and it was a tough grind. Once you signed, which Al can tell you, it was tough from the day you signed that contract to get to the big league.
Right.
It ain't like it is now. And if it hadn't been for all those players, then all the awards that I've gotten, and I've got a ton of them, I've got about every award there is in scouting, wouldn't have been coming my way. And some of the big awards that I've got is like this ring right here is about 3 years ago, the Professional Baseball Scouts Foundation started up an award called Legend in Scouting, which was it's a worldwide thing. I got the first award, the Major League Baseball Scouts Hall of Fame, Cincinnati Reds Scout Hall of Fame, Scout of the Year, I don't know how many times, the Ohio Sports Hall of Fame, and it just goes on and on and on. And basically I could come back and say, what if you hadn't have had the insight to know a little bit about how Mr. Ricky was so successful? What do you think you would have done? I'd have been lost, is what it would have been. Because I played just like Al had played. He knew what it takes to get to the big leagues. I knew what guys played good done to the big leagues, but I was able to do that all quick.
And yet, I like that you mentioned the ring that you had, because I just got a note from Randy over here that says to ask about
the rings.
Yeah. So is that the one you were referring to?
Then a couple years ago, I got the Major League Baseball Scout of the Year. I got that about 2 years ago.
That's a great honor.
I think I've got
millions of scouts out there.
I've got like about 6 of these, because when we win, then we got a ring also. And I know I was the advanced scout on some of the years when we won the World Series. So I got on that one, I got, say, 61, 70, 72, 75, 76, and 90. Of course, we won it in 76, 75, was it?
75 and 76.
75, 76, and 90. On 75, 76.
And 90.
And 90.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other awards were just awards that were won. And then, too, coming up through those years when I was scouting, Tops has an award, for Player of the Month or Year, whatever. I won that Tops Award 14 times. And then they had another award, All-Star Scout Award, and I won that 2 times. So, and you get them to going down there and you get my age, you can't remember all of them.
That's great. And Randy told me that you had a story on your hand too here.
Yes, in 1971, we were fortunate enough to be world champions at Pittsburgh. And that year, as it turned out, we played the San Francisco Giants. And of course, as Gene had mentioned before, they won it in the division in 70, 72, and 75. And they beat us. And so those 3 rings that Gene is wearing should be on my hand.
Uh-huh.
But the great thing about that was the Reds and the Pirates, it wasn't a rivalry. We both respected each other, as a team. It's nothing like the Yankees and the Red Sox. We just knew there was going to be some ball playing going on. So, being that history is where it was, I'm glad we played San Francisco in 1971 as opposed to the Reds. And of course, my other ring is an all-star ring, which I was forced enough to play on 7 all-star teams, but I'll wear this particular ring for 2 reasons. 1976 was the bicentennial year in baseball. And at that time, I was also leading the league in hitting. So that's why I wear this particular all-star ring. But I sat back and I think, and I sat here and listened to what Gene was saying. The one thing that Gene has going for him is that all the honors that he has gotten is well deserving. And the 2 traits that he's always had that I have paid close attention to. First of all, he's a very confident person. But at the same time, he's a humble person. And that's a tough combination to find. Because most confident people can be cocky, but he's not cocky. He believes in himself. And I think that's the reason why he was very successful. And by him being humble is the reason why he was able to get these bird dog scouts to help him. Because if they looked at him as being a cocky guy, or they would not have went along with him. And that's a heck of a combination, to be confident and be humble at the same time. And he deserves all that he's gotten. And just for the record, being that we're talking about history here today, a lot of people often wondered, why didn't the Reds sign Al Oliver? Well, I'm here to tell you today, Gene Bennett did approach my dad.
On the railroad track.
On the railroad track. Good thing there was no train coming. But he approached my dad. And my dad told him at the time, and which I didn't know this really until years later. But he did try to sign me, but Dad wanted me to go to college at that time. And as it turned out, I didn't go to college. I ended up signing with the Pirates. But just for historical records, Gene Bennett did try to sign me as a Cincinnati Red.
Hey, that was by the railroad track. Hey, anyway, and the way the game is played, see, Al was probably in the last class of free agent players that could sign when you were out of high school or college, or when you become 21 years old or whenever you went 8 semesters in school. Now, starting in 76, was it?
Of the draft?
Yeah.
65.
Or 65.
Mm-hmm.
Starting in 65, you had to go through the baseball draft,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I remember we had a meeting, and I know we were playing real good. And we thought that if we had a center fielder that could really play defense and could hit some, we might just sweep everybody. So we was in this meeting. Bob Housen was the general manager. Chief Bennett was the farm director. And Dick Wagner was the assistant general manager. And we're talking about who you think it might be that would really be the piece. Now, when you talk about the Big Red Machine, you're talking about one of the good baseball teams that was ever put together.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Mr. Housen, I said, hey, there's a kid right in my hometown that I really would have loved to have signed. I said, he's a good player now, but he's going to be a star. And I said, that might be the guy that you're looking for because he can hit with power, he can run like a deer, he can field, he can throw. And you can't do no more than those 5 things. Well, I forget who the general manager, Hank Peters, who? Peters?
It either had to be Joe Brown.
Joe Brown.
Yeah, Joe Brown.
We got Joe Brown on the phone. He laughed at us. we told that we had a deal. We'd package some players together and make it a good deal because, you people need some filling guys here and there, And conversation in the last 2 minutes, he laughed at it.
Al, you've spoken about what a powerful influence your father had in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, and also maybe some coaches, Little League, high school? I've heard you speak of some men, local boys.
Yeah, definitely. My father was the key for me as an athlete growing up. He was a great athlete in his day. He played. Very few people know that he played for the Harlem Globetrotters, and he was also an alternate for Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. Very few people know that. But Dad, the one thing about Dad, he let me play. He never stepped in unless I did something wrong. Because sometimes if you see talent, sometimes it's best to leave it alone. Because you might mess it up. So the only time that he ever corrected me, I never forget, I was playing basketball for the Trojans. It was my junior year in high school. He always called me Junior. He said, always stay. Don't let your man get behind you under the basket because you're hurting. But it was the fact that he had so much confidence in me. And it's great to know that a parent has confidence in you. And that's kind of like my grandsons today. And even my grandson who played, who I have 2 of them. I kind of lay back and just let them play. But my son, who was a wide receiver at Texas A&M, I left him alone because he had great hands that he could catch. But Dad was the key because he instilled confidence in me as a young kid and never wavered. He never worried about me because for some reason he knew I would be all right. It was my sister that he was concerned with. But when we talk about coaching, my first coach in Little League was Paul Jones in the Western Division up on the reservoir. And I think to this day I look back and I laugh because he did not want no hitter to take the 3rd strike. And that's part of the reason why I was as aggressive a hitter as I was. Because if you took the 3rd strike, you wouldn't play the next game. Then as I moved up the ladder, I had Steve Herbold in Pony Leg up at Mound Park. And then I moved on to high school where I had Harry Weinbrecht, who was the head baseball coach and my assistant basketball coach. And then, of course, during the summer, I had the legendary Bill Newman. And Bill Newman, and I think that had a lot to do with my nickname being Scoop, he hit me more ground balls at first base. And the one thing about Bill, you might be tired, but don't admit it. And that's just where it was back then. Now, guys today couldn't handle that. You know, we were a little tougher back in those days. But he was a hard worker. And the only thing Bill wanted us to do is hustle. And that's the reason why we still get along to this day. And I talked to him 2 weeks ago. And from time to time. And that's the one thing that he always liked about me. He said that I was a hard worker. And probably the most thing that stands out of my mind is what he told me about Al Oliver. I was always my own man. In other words, I managed to stay out of trouble. You know, I didn't hang around with bad people. I was my own person. And as we know in today's society, it's easy to get caught up, you know, with negative peers. But all that came from my upbringing with my dad, although I lost my mother when I was 11. And my dad passed away the same day I found out that I was going to be called to the major leagues. So neither one of my parents ever saw me play Major League Baseball. But my mother said when I was 4 or 5 years old, she said, you know, Junior is going to be a ball player. She saw it early, just like Gene can tell you right now about one of my grandsons. He's a ball player. I don't know what sport yet. It might be basketball, but you can see at an early age. But those were the people who were very influential in my life. And Eugene Collins Sr. was my first basketball coach at Washington Grade School. I don't think we ever lost a basketball game. You know, it was all black grade school at that time. And, you know, when we went into the gyms, of course, you know, we could outrun everybody. We could outshoot everybody. It was just something different. They hadn't seen an all-black team play basketball. But Gene taught us discipline. And that's the thing that I always enjoyed about Gene. But all those men that I just mentioned were key figures in my life.
I didn't realize the schools around here were segregated ever.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
When did it change?
It started to change somewhat in the 60s. And you know, Gene, I can say and talk all day, but one of my best buddies who Gene played ball with, Kirk Gentry. And Gene was involved in some of the segregation that was going on and the racism that was going on back in the day. And Kurt and I talk about this often. And Gene probably can tell you this story. They went somewhere. I don't know if they were down in Kentucky or somewhere, but Kurt was hearing the catcalls. You know, they were throwing out all kind of names. And all of a sudden, Kurt just turned it on. Remember that, Gene?
Yeah, Kurt, I just quit playing. I was scouting then. And I can't remember the name of it. It might have been a coal company like West Liberty Coal or something way down the sticks. He called me and said, hey, we want to get in this NBC, National Baseball Conference, the one that goes to Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you had all the pro players been released and all of them was in that thing. And he said, do you think you could get me a team together that would be good enough for us to win the state and then maybe go to a sectional and maybe go to Wichita? And I said, well, I don't know. That's pretty tough talking there. You know, Willie Horton was coming along for the Detroit at that time.
Okay.
And Woody Fryman too.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, I'd give it a try. And he said, and would you play? I said, yeah, I'll play. So I got Kurt. Too. Well, we took off in the state tournament down in Paintsville, Kentucky. And, oh man, there's on old Kurt. There's on old Kurt, man, like it was a Hank coming through there, you know. But anyway, they had a fence out there in center field. It was only about this high. And then there was a swimming pool back over in here. So about the middle of the game, one of those players, I don't remember who we were playing, he hit one over that fence, and old Kurt took off after that thing, running as hard as he could run. He looked down, saw the fence, jumped over the fence and caught the ball on the other side of it. They went crazy. So now the next time he came up to bat, he hit a fastball that landed in the swimming pool where nobody had ever hit one. And after that, he was the king down there. But anyway, we'd come back. Harry Weinberg go with it.
Okay.
We'd come back after the game. We'd drive back here. So now, we stopped down, hadn't had nothing to eat. We're heading down there to play a game. And we was running a little bit late. So we got down to Louisiana, which, boy, I mean, you talk about, they didn't know, but there's this one color that was white.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, let's pull in here and get some quick sandwich, because otherwise we ain't going to get nothing to eat. So we wheeled in there, me and Harry and Kurt went in, and we sat down. We looked around. They wasn't no black face in that whole building, you know. So we sat there and waited. They never did come over to wait on us. No, never going to wait on us. So finally this big old tubby guy, looked like he weighed 300 pounds, about this big, had a big dirty apron on him, come down. He says, we'll wait on you two white guys, but you know what? He got go. Mm-hmm. So I told him, I said, let me tell you something, big guy. You're going to wait on all three of us, or we're all three going to go. He said the door's right.
And you know, we can laugh about it because Kurt and I talk about once every 2 weeks. Oh, yeah. And when I bring that up, and he still says to this day, he said that he had more respect for Gene Bennett than he's ever had because, yeah, hey, I mean, they could have ignored Kurt and went on and ate. But they said the bottom line was if Kurt couldn't eat, none of us want to eat. And Kurt tells that story all the time. I mean, I never was in that situation except once, but I can just imagine what that was like, and especially knowing Kurt, you know, the way I do. And speaking of Kurt Gentry was a defensive back for the Chicago Bears.
Wow.
Yes.
He was a class guy.
Along this subject, Al, I don't know what year it was, but the Pittsburgh Pirates fielded an all-minority, or correct me, all-African-American starting lineup. How did that come about? When did you realize that this was history in the making, and how did you feel about that day?
Yes, this was September the 1st, 1971. It was a day that is still historical. We usually fielded 6 black or Latin players anyway. So, you know, if we added 3 more, it really wasn't no big thing. You know, you really didn't think much about it. And so probably about the 3rd inning is when I was aware of it. And so I was on the bench and I was talking to Dave Cash, a teammate of mine, and I said, Dave, you know what? We got all brothers out there, man. and you know, so, you know, we kind of chuckled about it and we thought about who was playing where and there. And the ironic thing about that, and it's history now, but Woody Fryman, the late Woody Fryman, who had just recently passed on, he was pitching for Philadelphia. And Woody could be tough on left-handers. And normally Bob Robertson would normally have played first base that night. And either I'd played center or Gene Clines would play center and I'd have been on the bench. But that night, Bob Robertson didn't play. I played first base, ended up having a good game. And it was black and Latins. The Pirate organization was known to have a lot of black and Latin players back then, even early, way back.
And Cubans too.
Exactly. And so I never will forget that after the game, the writers went in and asked Danny Murtaugh, was he aware that he had written out on a lineup card an all-minority team? And Danny Murtaugh's response was, I just wrote the guys' names on a lineup card that I thought that could win that game that night. That was Danny Murtaugh's response. History. They don't talk a lot about that. I don't know why, but here we are in 2011. 40 years ago is when this happened. And I'm just glad that I was part of that history.
There was two men, even in their death, it still affects baseball more than anyone that I know of, is Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente. 1972, you guys are playing the Cincinnati Reds. You're in the outfield between two Hall of Famers.
Mm-hmm.
Don Gullett, the last game of that series, threw the last pitch to Roberto Clemente. And it was unfortunate that he died that following winter. Tell us a little bit about Roberto Clemente, I know, and what he meant to you then and today. I don't think he was respected as a player like he is today, or as a person.
Roberto Clemente, to me, what stood out to me about him, he was for real as a person. A lot of times guys talk a whole lot of nothing. I mean, they can carry on a conversation with you for an hour and have not said a word. But Roberto was the type of guy that he would visit hospitals, he would visit the sick. The news media would never know anything about it. And usually those kind of people do those things from the heart. There were other players who did things, and there was the news media there. But Roberto wasn't like that. He got a bad rap when he first came up. They said that, being a Latin player, his English was not good. Well, to me, it was a cop-out. I mean, he didn't speak like Dr. Martin Luther King, but they understood what he was saying. They thought that he was cocky, but he wasn't cocky. He was just a very, very self-assuring ball player. The relationship that he and I had was that our personalities were somewhat similar. We were somewhat laid back off the field, but enjoyed a good laugh. We would be instigators more than anything else. And he could relate to me. And when I came up, I was platooned my first couple of years. I didn't like it because I knew I should be playing every day. And so he saw the disappointment in me. And he came over to me and he said, look, I understand the situation. He said, you just stay in shape and keep doing what you're doing. Because one day, you will get the opportunity to play every day. And when you do, you're going to be one of the best players that ever played this game. He saw something in me early. I think he saw a lot of him. I was not the player he was. I didn't have the arm that he had. But he saw that I could be a super player. And by him telling me that meant a lot to me at that time, because not having a dad is always, he proved to me that he was a leader. And that's the kind of guy he was. He didn't do a whole lot of idle talking. When he spoke, you listened and you knew he was for real. When he was killed in a plane crash, the biggest blow I think that any player can have is when you lose your leader just like that. If he had been sick, then maybe it'd have been a little better. But so sudden, it shook the whole team. And I never forget opening day of 1973 was probably the worst time of my life and the Pirates to be lined up on the field. His wife's there, his kids are there. Very difficult day for us. I don't know if we won or lost that game. I don't remember. But he was the greatest player person that I ever played with. He meant a lot to me. I was very fortunate to get his blessing. That meant a lot. I had opportunity to meet Jackie Robinson. And that was a thrill for me, meeting him. It wasn't a long conversation, but that was all right with me. You know, I met Jackie Robinson, the guy who set the stage for Afro-American players like myself to play. He took a lot, but he sustained and he maintained with integrity. He wasn't a complainer because Mr. Rickey had told him for a couple of years you just had to accept what came your way and not fight. Because Jackie Robinson was a fighter, but he didn't fight. He followed Mr. Rickey's rules. And I will always respect Jackie Robinson for that. But I will have more respect, as much respect for Mr. Rickey for standing up and bringing someone like Jackie Robinson into the major leagues. Because believe me, back then, they were not ready for blacks to enter into the game. I know going as far back as Happy Chandler, he was for it. But it was the commissioners before Happy Chandler that really was totally against it. And Happy Chandler was basically, here he is from Kentucky. And the kicker is, you talk about Kentucky, Pee Wee Reese. He embraced Jackie Robinson. And I think that turned the tide totally around as far as integration in the major leagues. And Gene probably can talk more about Jackie Robinson in that regard and his relationship, you know, with Pee Wee Reese. But I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to have met Jackie Robinson, and I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to have played next to Roberto Clemente because he made me a better player. I had to be a better player because I would embarrass myself if I wasn't.
You know, talking about Roberto Clemente, you know, I think at a time there that color and everything played into it. Because I remember back when I played, the first few years I played, couldn't have none. Then they let you have two. Felipe Alou was one.
Okay.
And then the question was he a Latin or was he an American? Well, they wouldn't let him play in the, was that the Evangeline League down in New Orleans, Louisiana, and down there. They wouldn't even let him play down there. So they had to ship him off till he were going to play. But in all my years in baseball, and I know I've told this a lot of times, I've told Al this, I believe the greatest throw, talking about Roberto, that I've ever saw in my life, and I don't think I'll ever see it again, was in Baltimore in the World Series.
Oh, yeah.
And there was, in the ninth inning, and the Pirates were ahead by 1 run. Baltimore had a runner on second and 1 out. And they hit a ball down, like you see on TV, the right field line. And you know, back in those days, everything was done just the right way. In other words, you fielded the ball this way, you did this, everything was right. And Roberto Clemente came from right field. And just like tonight, you see TV, a dozen balls were dropping down there for base hits. He came on the dead run. I mean, like he's running the 60-yard dash. And on the dead run, caught that ball right like this. And back then, you didn't spin around and do all that stuff. You got the ball and you got set to throw. He caught that ball right here like this. And now I'd say he's probably 275, maybe 300 feet from third base. And the base was behind him, because he's running dead toward the line. He caught that ball and spun and threw the ball, and it never even sank. Came right down right here. Of course, this guy, he's coming. Wasn't even close. Threw him out. You guys got the next guy out. It's all over with.
You know, and
You remember that?
oh, do I? Absolutely.
Never saw, and you'll never see a play like that.
Yeah, and what made him, you know, the play so great, like Gene was saying, here's a guy who's running full speed in one direction, and he spins. That was almost his trademark. If you hit a ball down the right field line, and he is starting to spin, you better stop. When I first came up, I came up as a first baseman, and he told me that any ball that's hit to him in right field, you know, you assume that's going to be a single. But he said, Al, don't turn your back on me, because I might be throwing to first base to get that runner.
I knew.
Yes. Or if you, back then, your eighth hitter was usually your weakest hitter, and he was playing more shallow. And I saw more eighth hitters hit singles to right field and run full speed to first base before he could throw them out. And he did throw a few of them out, but he was great. I'm just glad that I had the honor to play with him.
There's a thread. Branch Rickey was a big impact in Jackie Robinson and also Roberto Clemente early before the Pirates drafted him. And I notice you always call him Mr. Rickey.
Everybody.
Why do you call him Mr. Rickey and not Branch?
He was Mr. Rickey. He wasn't Branch Rickey. He was Mr. Rickey. Hey, and I'll tell you what. I'll bet you Roberto Clemente called him Mr. Rickey.
Oh, yeah.
I'll bet you if Ted Williams walked up to him, Mr. Rickey. I've never heard anybody ever call him anything except Mr. Rickey. Yeah.
Al, Larry Heisel told me a story once. He was on the way to the ball field, and I think he was on the team bus. He looks up and he sees this large sign. It was Kathleen Battle was going to appear at this concert in that same city he was in. And the fact that those two, you know, from this small area, was headlining that city.
Right.
How was it to step on the big field with a Gene Tennis or Larry Heisel? And do you have any stories about those guys in the big leagues when you know you guys actually got to play each other?
Well, of course, Larry and I played early against each other when I was in Pittsburgh, and of course he was with Philadelphia. And you know, at Larry's beginning, he pulled the ball more than he did hit the ball to the opposite field. And I would tell guys that, you know, it's best to throw Larry away and force him to pull the ball. But most of the stories about Larry and I in the major leagues, it seemed like we kept missing each other. You know, we kept missing each other. But I never forget with Larry, when Larry was with Milwaukee, McClure, a left-hand pitcher for Milwaukee, he had the audacity to knock me down. Okay, big mistake. Next time I get up, I hit one off the center field wall in Arlington, Texas. And Larry had told them, that's one guy you don't want to mess with. And for two reasons. You're not going to whip him, and you're not going to get him out. And Larry told me that story later. And I know Larry, if I'm not mistaken, that same game, hit a home run.
Wow.
And the key to Larry was, and Gene will tell you, Larry became a better hitter as he moved upward. As he got older, he started hitting home runs to right center field. Something that he never did in Little League, Pony League, high school. He pulled everything. And as soon as Larry came to his own, that's when he developed bone spurs in his shoulder. And that really hampered his career because he was on his way to be a real star. Larry was a great athlete, and it was just an unfortunate thing. But one thing about Larry, he didn't complain about it. And, you know, when guys hook up like that, you know, from being former teammates. Gene Tennis tells a story. He was catching for San Diego. Raleigh Fingers was pitching, and Raleigh was known to throw and keep the ball away from hitters. But this time, Raleigh wanted to come inside on me. Gino kept telling him, do not throw him inside for a strike. He's going to hurt you. Gene went back. He said, okay. He put down the fastball signal. And this was ironic. I was a confident hitter. But I think Dave Parker was following me. Or he was right in the area, on deck area. I got the bat. I was the first hitter up. I said, fellas, put the bat down. Get your gloves, because we're going home. I go to the plate. First pitch, bam, home run. We win the ball game. That's the first time I've ever tried to hit a home run and hit one. As Gina tell you, it is hard to hit a home run and try to hit one. But you got everything has to be perfect. It has to be the right pitch, in the right location, and everything. And Gino talks about that all the time. And but you know, it's unfortunate we didn't play against each other a lot in the major leagues. But boy, those Junior American Legion stories we got are unbelievable. I mean, we had a great team, and there were a couple other guys on that team that I thought, well, that did sign, but didn't make it. But it was great, you know. Of course, I was forced up to bump into Caffeine Battle at times on some of our trips, and for all three of us who grew up in the North End together, that was something, you know. It really was. But one thing about us before those games, with Gene and with Larry, we would always get together before the game, and sometime after the game we go out and have dinner. But we always had stories to tell. And people from Southern County, we never lacked stories. And one thing about those stories that we told, we couldn't lie, because we were teammates. You see, if we didn't play together, see, we could really add some yeast to those stories. But we couldn't lie.
Yeah.
But we just reminded each other of how great we were. And that was something in itself.
Well, what was it in Little League with you and Larry?
Oh, man.
The home runs or the hits, you get a free Pepsi?
Yeah.
How did that work?
Oh, that was some big time stuff. And I would like to see it do it now. In Little League, if you hit a home run, you got 4 coupons. You hit a triple, you got 3. Double 2, single 1. And Larry always tells a story. You know, I very seldom went over 4. And Larry always said, well, if anybody didn't have the coupons, they could always go to Al and get some coupons. You know, that's the Larry Heisel story about Al Oliver. But Larry got his share too. You know, Larry hit a lot of home runs. And a couple times he hit a couple off me too, because, you know, I pitched in too. But that was Larry's Heisel story about me in Little League. And you know what? And that's when the Shake Shop was up. And we all rode our bikes. After the game, we would go down to the Shake Shop.
What location?
The Shake Shop was right where Wendy's is right now on 23.